Hello, and welcome to the Two Real Cinema Club. I'm James Roslica.
And I am Andres Lorente. And at the Two Real Cinema Club, we watch a couple of movies, usually one old and one new, and we try and make some connections between the two. And this week we're going to discuss, in a moment, what is it called? The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. Did I get that right, Jimmy?
You did that. You did get it right. It feels like it should be The Unbearable Weight of Nic Cage. I think they really missed a trick not putting his name in the title.
Probably.
But yeah, that's it.
Yep, we're a film in which Nic Cage plays Nic Cage, and we are going to be comparing and contrasting that to Being John Malkovich from 1999, in which John Malkovich, at times, seems to be playing John Malkovich. So we've got a theme already. I don't want to give away too much more than that. I would like to say that I've had news, Jimmy, from both... I should say both our listeners. No, I should say both of our audiences in the United States and abroad.
All right.
And the verdict is good. People are enjoying the programming. They say about us that it's a very good thing. Well, my American friends here saying it's a very good thing that you're on the program with your sense of humor and your beautiful, smooth British accent.
See, it only sounds beautiful and smooth in America. In Britain, it sounds very pedestrian.
Oh, well, my English friend says it's very good that I have a partner who's very smooth comic with a British accent. So
I'm available for voiceover. So it's probably worth saying we are now denizens of the Muskiverse. Now we are now slaves of Elon Musk. We're on Twitter at Two Real Cine Club. We're on Instagram at Two Real Cinema Club, and we're on YouTube as well at something like YMKVVGGH914. But I'm sure if you just search for us on YouTube, you will find us. So yeah, we're bursting out all over the internets. So thanks for the feedback. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy the show,
absolutely.
tell your friends. If you don't, tell your friends anyway.
yeah, give us positive reviews or more honest reviews if you must, but give us some stars. Make sure that people are aware of what we're doing, and please share your insights with us. Do we have a way for listeners to contact us yet, or are we a little bit far behind?
We do actually. Yes, we are Two Real Cinema Club at Gmail, so people can even email us directly, or you can tweet us. I feel like that's going to turn into Musk us, isn't it? You can Elon us at Two Real Cine Club, or you can Insta us as well. So people can get hold of us somehow.
Yeah. Musk us sounds.
I'm trying my hardest not to sound like an old man here, but it's not working. So this week we both went to see Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent.
Yeah.
For people who haven't seen it or haven't seen the trailer, what's it about?
Oh boy. Well, I saw the trailer. I think this was the problem. I saw the trailer and I saw immense potential. I thought this was great. Nic Cage doing the Nic Cage thing. And acting again. I had seen Nic Cage at the end of the summer in a film called Pig. I don't know if you've seen that or not. We haven't talked about that.
I haven't.
Which, for the most part, except for one sort of just ridiculous and gratuitously violent scene in the middle that makes no advance of the storyline, it was a pretty good film. I enjoyed it. It was just this one silly moment, but it seemed like he was acting again. I just think Nic Cage is not really living up to his potential. I remember Nic Cage when I was teenager, early 20s, with films like it's called Racing with the Moon and Birdie. He just had some fantastic roles early on. And then somewhere maybe late 90s, I don't know, when he started doing those, was it the American Treasure films? What was that called?
Oh yeah, National Treasure.
National Treasure, sorry. Those films. And then there was another one with a motorcycle dude. He was on fire as he drove around the world.
That's not Drive Angry, is it? That's that Death Ride. I don't know. That's like an early proto-Marvel film, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, definitely. And then I feel like he just kind of stopped acting.
Started cashing the checks.
Started counting the dollars. So he's done very well for himself. But this film just came out, so I guess 2022. A film by Tom Gormican, director, and he co-wrote with Kevin Etten. And
who I think was a Letterman writer. I had to look him up. So he got his start on Letterman, and then was like a writer and producer on Desperate Housewives.
Okay,
so that's his background.
Interesting. And this film doesn't work. I'm going to say that this film doesn't work without Charlie Kaufman to a certain extent, because they sort of steal a character from adaptation. because he's playing Nic Cage.
Okay.
He plays sort of an earlier Nic Cage, and maybe also Wild at Heart from David Lynch.
David Lynch,
way back when. I think the sort of the alter ego for Nic Cage in this film is an earlier Nic Cage, but an acting Nic Cage. So it's interesting because he's sort of playing two things. He's playing himself, and then also sort of an earlier character, or kind of an amalgamation of a couple earlier characters. Nick's in career limbo. He doesn't get the job that he really wants. Has a terrible relationship with his daughter, who is not his real daughter. They go to therapy together. It's a pretty funny scene. He drinks a lot. He has to take a job. So I guess sort of the end of the act one is that he ends up having to take this job, going to a party in Mallorca at this really uber rich guy's compound. And his name's Javier. And they make many jokes about him pronunciation, the pronunciation of his name, Javi, and super rich, but he also might be related to organized crime or a mobster himself. But he also has a screenplay, and he wants Nick to read it, and he wants to make the film with Nic Cage. He's a massive Nic Cage fan, and he may have kidnapped the daughter of a politician. So the CIA, I guess, makes contact with Nick because they know he's there, and they want him to spy on Javi and find the girl. One early connection with John Malkovich is the fact that in Javier's compound, there's this one Nic Cage sort of lair. It's a monument to all things Nic Cage. He's collected all these things from Nic Cage. And we see it when you talk about Being John Malkovich, we'll see a similar moment where someone has a sort of an homage to John Malkovich in his house. So they definitely are working kind of on the same plane here, these two films. There's a bromance that ensues. Javi and Nick really ended up hitting it off, and they're having a great time together, and they start writing a new screenplay together. And Nic Cage sort of extends this project in order to spend more time casing out the situation for the CIA. So he's using this opportunity to hang out at this compound in Mallorca to actually get a little deeper into the Javier case. I guess they start working against each other. They nearly kill each other, of course, because they're both sort of escaping the real boss, who's Javi's cousin.
Right.
And they sort of end up not only saving the politician's daughter, but also Nick's daughter, who's flown over with Nick's ex-wife, again, not his real ex-wife, to check on him. And I got a little confused early on because Nick's playing himself, his real self, I guess, but it's not an actual real daughter or a real ex-wife.
No, the daughter, interestingly, I had to look this up, is the real daughter of Kate Beckinsale and Michael Sheen.
Yes.
So she is a different showbiz daughter, but not his showbiz daughter.
Yes. And then their real lives sort out. Javi's and Nic Cage's, I guess, their real lives in the film, by their writing together, and their relationship is actually really nice. They really buddy out. They really find a lot of things in common, and they do write this film, and then to a certain extent, the film that they're writing informs the Nic Cage film, the Unbearable Weight of Massive
We're
Talent.
watching, yeah.
Or vice versa. I mean, there's a nice little trick there, I think. My biggest complaint is that it lacks some of the Charlie Kaufman cleverness. It's sort of in that genre, on that plane, but it ends up sort of being a Nic Cage film. It ultimately just sort of becomes the kind of Nic Cage film that we're parodying.
It becomes the thing it hates.
Yeah. And I don't know how self-reflective all that was, or if that's the whole point of the film. But as I sort of alluded to earlier, most of the Nic Cage's films of the last 10 or 15 years, for me, they're not really entertaining. They're not that good. So I don't know why you would go to all this trouble of parodying the film and then and have the parody end up sort of taking over the film, and it just becomes another one. It gets kind of violent, too. The body count kind of rises, even though this is sort of like an innocent comedy picture. And as I said, I loved the trailer. I thought this was going to be a great film, and it just doesn't quite hit the premise the way I was expecting it to. It's definitely entertaining. I laughed a few times. There's I think a wonderful scene where he has to play an Italian mobster, and his wife just happens to be a former makeup artist, and he gets into this costume, and he inhabits that role beautifully. It's quite funny. but it's at the same time, I think that's when the whole film is kind of falling apart on another level. So it's getting great in terms of Nic Cage not being Nic Cage for a little while and playing another character, but then the film is, at that point, it's just kind of falling apart. And then it actually ends up sort of doing exactly, I think that's like a little wink moment where the last scene is actually, God, who is in it? It's Demi Moore, right? Demi Moore plays his
it is
wife.
Demi Moore. Yeah, absolutely.
So it ends up on this action scene, which is actually them finally filming the script that he'd written with Javi, and they even have an opening night premiere in there. So I guess again, I don't feel like it really hit the Charlie Kaufman bars that I think it was going for. I'm not really sure what they were trying to do exactly, but after having seen Pig recently, I thought, boy, he was and he is a good actor. He can do some great things, but this is not a fantastic film. It's just kind of an average. It was nothing terribly offensive, but I think it just missed potential. And I think the scenes that I liked the most were the twins scenes where he's playing both a younger self, I guess.
He speaks to a younger version of himself, kind of CGI'd in. Yeah.
And it's almost like Nic Cage is wrestling with his past and sort of dismissing it, when I think that character could have driven it more. I think he shows up, the Nic Cage twin character shows up maybe 5 times or something like that. And I actually think that those are some of the more interesting things, because he's acting against himself in those scenes, and it's kind of a lively character, of course. But it turns out it's just part of his imagination. So
he gives himself a big kiss, doesn't he? Which is it's one of the kind of big gags in the film.
Yeah,
it's interesting you're saying that you felt like it ended on a bit of a wink, because I felt like the whole movie was an enormous wink. I wrote here in my notes that it was being like being hit over the head with a rock with irony written on it in felt tip pen, while somebody plays Alanis Morissette in the background. I mean, it's yes, this is irony the movie.
Yeah.
But I think this film kind of tries to have its cake and eat it, which is one of those idioms that's always annoying me. I don't understand what's with the having the cake and the eating and having is the same thing, isn't it? I wish people said keep its cake and eat it. Those are two different things. Having a cake and eating is the same thing.
I'm so glad you brought that up, if I can interject for a moment, because I think it's actually supposed to be that you can eat your cake and have it too.
Oh,
so it's not of course you can have it for a little while, look at it, eat it, it's gone, but you can't eat it and then have it.
So people then have it afterwards.
The word order is wrong, and it makes a complete difference.
I feel like scales have been lifted off my eyes.
Isn't that great?
That's amazing.
Yeah. So
I knew there was a reason we were doing this podcast. Now I've learned something.
Certainly not learning anything about film, but
I've written here that it's in my little notes here, this is the most slavishly hero's journey film I have seen in years. But I think that is deliberate. I think they've really, really deliberately, perfectly hit all those hero's journey moments, moment by moment. I checked my watch, and the inciting incident of him losing the job happens at 10 minutes. It happens on page 10, which is the page that all the film writing schools will tell you need to have your inciting incident on. There's a call to an adventure. He refuses the call. Mm-hmm. He has tests allies and enemies. He goes into the innermost cave.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the final 30 minutes of the film, the two characters literally say, we need to sort out the third act.
Oh, yeah.
It's absolutely lifted directly out of the screenwriting book as the hero's journey. But I think they're doing that deliberately.
Yeah. It's another wink,
because they're kind of deliberately writing something which is ironically formulaic.
Yeah. And
trying to use this pattern to ladle an extra layer of irony on top of the film. And I think because of this, the film has this kind of perfect platonic shape, because it so closely adheres to the classic hero's journey 12-point structure. And because of this shape, I find it a little bit difficult to criticize. I feel like, strangely, this film has actually sort of achieved everything it set out to achieve.
Yeah.
Maybe it hasn't done it particularly subtly, and I don't think it's quite as clever as the film likes to think it is. But I found it actually a reasonably entertaining watch, because it hits all the notes in all the right moments.
Yeah.
In an almost mechanical way. The early part of the film, where there's some uncertainty about whether Javi is really an innocent olive grove farmer with a lot of money, or whether he's actually a crime boss. And you have a little bit of a will he, won't he, is he, isn't he? And that made me reminded a little bit of that David Fincher film, The Game. Have you seen that?
I haven't. That's a David Mamet script, is that right?
It might be. It's a Michael Douglas
And Sean
in a
Penn,
film
maybe.
as an incredibly rich guy who's so bored of life that his brother sets him up with this game where he will firmly believe that his life is in danger, but actually it's just all a very elaborate theatrical ruse. And I wonder whether they were going down that path where a lot of the characters, the CIA characters and the cousin or the brother who's like the real crime kingpin, they all seem so cartoonish and so difficult to believe that I was thinking maybe these are actually going to also be actors. And I wonder whether the film is going to play that card, but it doesn't actually. No, it pretty much sticks to its guns.
Yeah.
Any standout scenes?
There were some. I mean, again, I liked some of the buddy stuff. I think that was the strongest stuff in the film for me. So is there a moment where they take mushrooms by accident or something like that, or LSD?
It was LSD, isn't it? Yes.
They're driving. I mean, just some of that silliness, which again doesn't really. I mean, I guess it was to try and explore the paranoia that he was feeling because he's kind of getting drawn into this whole CIA thing and spying on his buddy. But I don't know that it furthered the story too much. But I think a couple of those moments were the standouts for me.
I mean, I've seen more Nic Cage films than I realised because I kept ticking off in my mind all the scenes that I recognised. The face-off references, they cleverly use his reflection to make him swap faces with himself.
Yeah.
And there's a scene when they're in the car and Harvey and Nic Cage swap shoes instead of swapping faces.
Yes.
So they're constantly referring to this. And there's a scene in The Rock. At the end, Nic Cage has to dramatically inject himself with the antidote to the nerve poison to save his own life.
Yeah.
And he has to, inject himself not very well in this. And so they're constantly ticking off references to other Nic Cage films. If you're a big fan, I know there are plenty of people who do really enjoy Nic Cage. Then this film, absolutely plays all its cards, and there's a lot of entertainment to be had from that.
Great. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up Face Off because I did love that film, and that is an example of where two actors really had a great time playing each other. Oh my God. So good. And I think they were going beyond the boundaries of the film they were making. They were really sort of playing each other in real life, and Travolta and Cage are great there. I love your insights on the hero's journey because you're absolutely right. I mean, it even starts with he's talking to a director, I don't know, or the writer of the film that he doesn't get the part for, and it just starts out as a film within a film, maybe even within a film. I don't know. And I think I'm just happy that at least someone does their homework for each one of these podcasts. It's usually you doing a great job. Yeah, I think that's absolutely. It's just wink, 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 wink. And I think what suffers is and I always do this. I mean, I use the hero's journey. I think a lot of writers do. I don't dwell on it though. I think you've got to break from it in order to do something original. So nothing felt original about it as a result. And you think like Charlie Kaufman, again, he might have a hero's journey, buried into his stories, but they become so filled with his unique and original touches that you don't. Yeah,
it's not on the surface.
If it's that obvious, then it's hero's journey done poorly, I think. And one interesting thing about this hero's journey, when you're talking about going into like the inner circle or the lair, it's actually Nic Cage looking at Nic Cage in this worship room, that Javi has for him with his guns from things and posters and signed pieces and all this memorabilia from the career of Nic Cage. It's bizarre. It's like the mind getting inside the mind, and we're going to see that, I think, in John Malkovich too. We're going to see it, which is also brilliantly done. So I think that scene to me is also a standout scene because it's going well against expectations. He's expecting to find the girl in there in some awful, hostage situation. Instead, he sees his own being held hostage in this Spanish gangster's castle. So that's another standout scene for sure.
I think that the big problem I have with such heavy irony in a film. I love irony. Irony is great, isn't it? We love irony. Yeah. It's like especially when you're in Britain, irony is 90% of the national personality.
Exactly.
But the worry is that once you have too much irony, it comes at a price, and the price, I think, is the price of any real emotional engagement. So the whole film is so arch that at the end, Nic Cage, the character, Nic Cage, the actor, has a kind of emotional redemption. And his failing relationship with his daughter and his spiky relationship with his ex-wife are somehow saved, and he has a transformation and he learns something and he's able to salvage something of his relationship with his daughter. But the fact that there's been so much goddamn winking for the previous 106 minutes means that then that I think any attempt at a proper emotional payoff, is kind of lost. So it ends up feeling, not very sincere. After a while, the jokes become the sole point of the whole story. And I don't think you can get away with, any kind of real emotional notes when you've been winking so hard. Tell you what, there is one thing that I would have changed.
Okay.
I think so. It does follow this very slavish hero's journey shape. And there's the moment that you mentioned specifically at the end when you have this this death trap moment. Did we talk about? Do you know? Do you remember the film Death Trap, which was Michael Caine and Christopher Reeve from like 1982, something like that?
Yes, Reeve he's a writer and he's writing a play. And he visits
it's kind of based on an IR11 play, I think, or an IR11 novel. And at the very end, all the characters in the film are fighting over who's going to get the gun or who's going to make it out of the house alive. And then you cut to the climax of the play of the film. And you have the reveal of who is the character who finally survived the final ordeal. They're the ones who wrote this play, which has become a Broadway hit. Mm-hmm. This film does the same thing, that you have this big emotional climax, which then morphs into the film of the story that we've just seen.
That's right.
And so it uses that to kind of to take one step removed from the engagement of the climax. And at that moment, Cage's wife, originally played by Sharon Horgan, is now suddenly replaced by Demi Moore.
Yeah.
And I was saying, if you're going to have Demi Moore appear in this film, why not go big and have Demi Moore appear as Demi Moore, as another guest at the party who also may be working for the CIA? I would have brought her in and let the audience enjoy that as a bit of a surprise. The film isn't called The Unbearable Weight of the Massive Talent of Nic Cage, but it probably should be, and Nic Cage is like front and centre.
Yeah.
So you know exactly what you're getting when you look at the poster. And to have another 90s film star turn up and do like an extra kind of ironic cameo actually might have been the extra bit of fun that the film is missing. That's what I would have done. If you paid Demi Moore to turn up for a day, get her for a week and get her to be in some more scenes.
Good point, yeah. It's not going to cost a whole lot more to get her there for the whole week, probably.
What's poor Demi Moore doing these days? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Overall, though, it's 107 minutes. It's brisk, sometimes maybe a little bit too brisk. Enjoyable. I did laugh a few times. I actually found it reasonably entertaining.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I had a bad time watching this film.
I think you've made me think a couple things, because I think there's a lot of a gun play leading up to that scene as well. There is like... this one gun that a couple of people try to get at one point or another. So it's awfully like pulling right off of that play as well. And it almost, the way you've talked about it, it makes me feel like this is a film that needs like a list of the sources that it's cited. Otherwise it's plagiarism, because it's taken so many other Nic Cage films. You might as well just cite the sources and put that in the credits somehow, because it does seem to like gather a lot of its material from other places.
Yeah, when does homage become plagiarism? Mm-hmm. You're right, good point. Yeah, absolutely. But then all the best artists steal, I suppose.
That's correct. That was John Lennon who said that. And I should correct myself right away. The Game was not written by David Mamet, but by John Brancato and Michael Ferris. So I was confusing it with another film, clearly.
I haven't seen The Game for a long time. I might go back and see it, actually. I wonder what that looks like these days.
Maybe we should put that on the... Don't ruin the surprise.
Put it on the list.
Our listeners, maybe that'll come up.
Right, let's have a break.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's fold away the massive hammer of irony for a few seconds, and then we're going to bring it back out again after the break and talk about Being John Malkovich. And we're back to talk about Being John Malkovich from 1999. Seems funny to talk about that as being a historical film, but actually that's 23 years ago now, isn't it? So Being John Malkovich, the debut of Spike Jonze, originally came up through the skateboarding scene. So he made skateboarding videos, he made music videos, he married Sofia Coppola, and Charlie Kaufman, the writer of Being John Malkovich, spent a long time trying to get this picture made. He gave the script to Francis Ford Coppola, who then gave it to his daughter's husband, in apparently 1997, and they struggled and struggled and eventually got it made in 1999. So it's I'm trying to think how to describe this film to someone who has never seen it. The best description is the 3 words of the title. It's one of those wonderful movies that kind of tells you what it is in those 3 words of the title. John Cusack is in it with Cameron Diaz, Catherine Keener, John Malkovich. Great cast for a late 90s picture. John Cusack is Craig, who is a failed puppeteer, performing on street corners and getting punched by passers-by for his troubles. He lives with his wife, Lottie Cameron Diaz, who works in a pet shop, and she has a menagerie of pets in their tiny apartment, and it's very kind of claustrophobic and strange. She tells him, "Honey, you need to get a job." So Craig gets a job at Leicester Core, filing in this bizarre half-height office on the floor 7.5. There, he falls in love with Maxine, who's Catherine Keener, and he discovers a portal behind a filing cabinet that leads down a tunnel, and at the end of the tunnel, you get to spend 15 minutes in John Malkovich's head. That's the thing that everybody remembers about this movie, and there are many other layers which I'd kind of forgotten about. But it's such a striking image, and it's so well summarised by the title that no wonder that's what everybody takes away from the film. So Maxine and Craig quickly they monetize this portal that they found. They're charging people $200 a pop to spend 15 minutes inside John Malkovich's head. But Lottie, Craig's wife, really loves it. She goes in again and again. And by occupying John Malkovich's head, by kind of trying on the John Malkovich suit, she kind of discovers her own sort of trans identity. Something that people didn't really talk about in 1999, I think. Certainly not something that I was aware of. Something which seems considerably more contemporary these days. So Maxine falls in love with Lottie, but only when she is wearing the John Malkovich suit. And Craig becomes extremely jealous. He manages to convince Maxine that he is Lottie when he is really the one inside John Malkovich, which is a kind of remarkable body swap betrayal. And then Craig figures out how to take over John Malkovich's body permanently rather than just for 15 minutes at a time. We flash forward to 9 months later, and Craig has been living in John Malkovich's body full time. John Malkovich is an observer of his own life, unable to do anything. And the John Malkovich that we see has now become a successful puppeteer, just like Craig. But there is a subplot that Lester, who runs Lester Corp, the place where the portal is, the company where Craig got his job, has actually been using the portal to prolong his life. And so at the end of the movie, Lester persuades Craig to get out of Malkovich's head. Lester enters Malkovich's head to then live his immortal life next stage inside John Malkovich. And Craig, chasing after him, ends up trapped inside the body of Maxine and Lottie's daughter. So later on in the film, we see 8 years later, Craig is trapped inside the mind of an 8-year-old girl, able only to watch, not able to participate, while he watches his ex-wife and his sometime love interest live a happy life together. Utterly mad. Shockingly mad, I think, for a mainstream film in 1999. Do you remember seeing it the first time round?
I did. Saw it in a big theater, proper way to see it. So big screen, a lot of people in a gorgeous old theater, and I remember liking it a lot. But I never went back to watch it again on, VHS or DVD or any of those things that we used to use. So I was very happy to find it and watch it again for the pod, and I liked it a lot. But I mean, same thing, just strange characters, strange dialogue, loved it. I love that kind of stuff because it's the opposite of the film we just talked about in the sense that it's very original. It's creative.
Absolutely.
It's so,
I think the thing that surprised me going back to it is there's so many pivotal bits of the movie that I'd just completely forgotten about. I'd forgotten that John Cusack's character is a puppeteer, but that's actually kind of fundamental to the story.
It is.
And there's a bunch of really memorable scenes that I had completely forgotten about. There's towards the end of the movie, Cameron Diaz and Catherine Keener have this crazy chase through Malkovich's subconscious with the camera moving all over the place and the point of view changing and the direction of gravity changing. It reminds me a little bit, I don't know whether you've seen Where the Wild Things Are.
Which is, another Spike Jonze film.
Yes, I think it's his most recent film. It really kind of has that tone, actually. And then there's another kind of great pivotal scene, the scene which everybody probably remembers, which is the scene where Malkovich discovers that these two strange characters are selling 15 minutes of time inside his head. So he forces them to let him go down the tunnel and spend 15 minutes inside his own head.
Yeah. Amazing.
Again, it's a really kind of memorable but utterly kind of bizarre film scene. I do remember watching that this time round. It did make me think, what are the rules about going inside Malkovich's head? Because I did feel a little bit like the scene where he enters his own head doesn't seem to obey the same rules as when everybody else goes inside his head. So I wasn't entirely sure whether they'd figured out what the rules were or whether it's just that new digital technology meant that they could put John Malkovich's head on many, many different actors. So they went for it. It makes this kind of, it's kind of funny, amusing, but
the
not
mumbo jumbo
scene.
Doesn't add up, but I guess I viewed it as a feedback loop. It's like there's some sort of problem with the system when you do that. You really can't do it, so that he just ends up seeing himself again and again. And it's a brilliant scene. I love it. The only word of dialogue is Malkovich, and there are, by the end of it, hundreds of John Malkoviches in the scene. I think it's brilliant, and I that's the way I justify it anyway. Is that it just really wouldn't work to go into your own head and see the world. You just see yourself, I guess. So that's how I understood it. I went with it. There's some other things that I still think about, like because Craig, the Cusack character, doesn't go in with Lester and his whole gang. I guess I didn't understand why an entire group of people could go into John Malkovich and live there. So that was hard for me. And then it seems like because John Malkovich is embodied by Craig at the very end of the film. So you're looking at Malkovich, and Craig has somehow gotten in there as well, as I understood it. So not only are all the old people in there, but Craig's in there too, and he seems to have more control than anyone else because he's got the puppeteering skills and he's learned Malkovich.
Right,
well. So he's in there too, and that, that's not shown explicitly in the film. As you said, he's left off in the sort of mumbo jumbos, but he must somehow get into the Malkovich body and sort of really take control, even though there are 20 or 30 other people in there as well. So it's one of those things where you just have to. But this is the kind of suspension of disbelief that I can do. You know what I'm saying? I will go with this. I won't go with, like an actor falling from a helicopter, getting shot, and then walking 10 miles, then getting knifed again, and then ending up at the end of the film saving people and surviving. I mean, I don't want to do that. I will do this. I will definitely accept that kind of level of disbelief, or this brand of disbelief. So I was fine with it.
Shows great skill, actually, I think, to weave this tale and to so successfully take the audience along with you.
Yeah.
It's interesting how Spike Jonze had a really interesting career, starting out with those handheld skateboard movies. You can still see them on YouTube, actually, some of his early skateboard movies. And there's something about that style and his early pop videos. I think he shot like Sabotage, that famous Beastie Boys video, and like the Fatboy Slim video of kind of people dancing in the shopping mall. There's something about that kind of shaky cam, handheld style, which informs the way that a lot of the scenes in Being John Malkovich are shot. And I think, I don't know whether part of it is that the shaky cam gives the film a verite kind of feel, but I think it's entirely absorbing. There is no moment in this film, as you rightly point out, there's no moment where I have trouble suspending my disbelief. Yeah. I'm utterly in the moment all the way through. It's very skillful when you consider how far out on a limb the story goes.
Yeah.
There's some great cameos in this film. Charlie Sheen turns up, gamefully being a kind of Charlie Sheen caricature, and especially later on in the film, he turns up as an older, balder Charlie Sheen doing a kind of a comedy turn, which is great to watch. Brad Pitt turns up for just like a fraction of a second. I had to look this up. David Fincher is playing one of the characters in the mockumentary about Malkovich's puppeteering career. So he appears as an LA Times critic. There's a whole bunch of really interesting cameos. There's all sorts of interesting little moments. In a way, this film suffers slightly from having too many ideas, I think. There are, especially early on in the film, there are moments when, to me, it feels almost like Charlie Kaufman was writing a series of Saturday Night Live skits. So, like, it feels like there should be a skit about rival puppeteers.
Yes,
and then there'll be a skit about a company that lives on the 7.5th floor of a building because we have low overheads.
Yep.
And I felt like some of these ideas, they didn't quite gel in with the rest of the film. They were entertaining, they were fun, and certainly memorable, and I'm glad they were there. But I don't think they quite. I think you could have made the whole film without having that 7.5th floor gag.
Yeah.
And nobody would have missed it. It's not integral. It's just, a cute, funny gag.
Yes.
And in fact, even some of the ideas, early on, Mr. Lester, the guy who runs the company, who is also hoping to use Malkovich's head as a vessel for his future life, he's kind of like this kind of bizarre comedy character who believes that he's got a speech impediment even though he hasn't, and he regales Craig with his kind of lengthy, detailed sex fantasies, which is entirely at odds with the character that Lester is in the last bit of the film.
Yeah.
There's enough going on that I think it's easy for the audience to forget those little details and just go along with the ride, but it's not entirely consistent.
Yeah, I do have a thought on that. And I think it has to do with exposition. I think for the Lester character, he's still talking like some 20 or 30-year-old self that he truly is. So I think it's inelegantly done, but I understand why they're doing it. It's to show that he's just occupying that Lester body right now. There's something in there, someone who's perhaps I don't know, a bit more debaucherous and thinking of his younger self, and you sort of get the residue of that earlier personality that's just in an older vessel. And overall, I think in terms of like exposition, exposition, of course, we talk about it as an enemy as writers, and that it's so often very boring. So when he goes back and explains why there's a 7.5th floor, I think it's kind of a certain, I'm going to have fun with it. I'm going to tell you a good story. It might not be worth it. It's going to take up some space in a film and on the page, but I'm going to do it, and it's going to be pretty funny. So those scenes, again, they bring a smile to my face. And with Spike Jonze, they're done really efficiently. And I think that does happen often in Charlie Kaufman, where he just gets on these detours that don't seem like they're doing much for the film and pushing it forward, but they are entertaining. I mean, and I would say that his most recent film does it way too much, and I was just completely lost in it. But in this film, I think it worked really well, and it sort of sets up the big exposition which comes in the middle of the film, and they're trying to solve some problems, I think. There's this long, as you said, it's sort of a documentary within the film on why did John Malkovich stopped acting and got into puppetry, and then it's a vehicle to get the whole timeline at first 8 months forward, I guess, and it's way too much to happen in 8 months. I mean, he has a baby, he changes his careers, he's got this expose on his talent in magazines, and this documentary is being done about all he's done in the last 8 months to become the best puppeteer in the world. It's completely unrealistic. And again, I'm going to buy it. I believe it. But it's an interesting bit of exposition that, again, I don't know you need to do that in the film, but they pull it off. There's a lot of there's sort of a Citizen Kane homage going on there as well.
Right.
It felt very much like that, like the old newsreels before the old movies. There's a lot going on, and they get away with it. And I got to say, that's interesting exposition. It's not boring, which is, most exposition is just a sort of, you go back and learn something about a character that explains something that's going on in the present day of the film. Most of that I hate. I like stories that are kind of either really lean and can get away without much exposition at all, or something like this, which is just having fun with exposition.
Yeah, it is actually, isn't it? going back to the Nic Cage film,
Yeah.
Javi and Nick, when they're having their struggles over trying to write their screenplay together, which Nic Cage is prolonging while he does some spying for the CIA, they ask each other that hoary old but tremendously important question: what's it about? Yeah. They literally ask, but what's it about? And I always end up asking myself, knowing that I'm going to talk about these films, I ask myself, what's it about? And it feels to me like Being John Malkovich should be about empathy. That if you can spend 15 minutes in someone else's shoes, quite literally, then that's a byword for empathy. There's what's a famous joke? If you don't like someone, walk a mile in their shoes.
Sure.
And then if you still don't like them, you'll be a mile away from them and you'll have their shoes. which is a Stephen Wright gag, not mine.
Yeah.
But so it feels like Being John Malkovich should be a film about empathy.
Yeah.
And yet this experience of spending 15 minutes inside John Malkovich's head engenders no empathy from any of the characters. Nobody in the movie says, "Oh, poor John Malkovich," or "I wonder how Malkovich is coping with this," or "No, he's utterly just a piece of meat to be used."
Yes.
No one has any sympathy for him. No one particularly has any empathy for each other, even. No. So I don't know whether they tickle us with the notion that this film could be about empathy and then just slam it in our face, or whether it's just that the decision was made, well, let's not develop this theme in the direction that it should. That it should go in.
Yeah, I think it borders more on Andy Warhol's 15 minutes, the 15 minutes of fame that he thought everyone should have. So regardless of anyone else's feelings, you're out there to get your 15 minutes of fame and feel what it's like to be famous and a superstar for that.
You get your 15 minutes of fame, but it's somebody else's fame.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why he probably settled on 15 minutes because. And John Malkovich was probably a bit more popular when this film came out. I mean, he's an interesting choice as a superstar to be inside the head of, but it works for the film, I think. But I think that's why he chose 15 minutes, and I think that's why there's very little empathy, because you think in fame, you're not looking for empathy, you're looking for more notoriety, I guess.
Yeah. Yep.
And one of the lines in their advertisement is, "Have you ever wanted to be someone else?" Right? I mean, that's how Maxine and Craig. Advertise it, just getting into some other body and getting away from your own life. Which, ironically, for John Malkovich, when he does get into himself, he just gets no life whatsoever. He's not having another life at all. He's just getting too much of his own life. I had a couple thoughts about the puppetry. I thought was super cinematic. I mean, I think it was beautiful. It was beautiful, and it seemed... just surreally cinematic. I thought it was fantastic. So I really enjoyed that. And I think, again, that's a great choice because it's really about you're learning how to control someone else's body. And that's what a puppeteer does, is controls the body. So it was a great choice to make John Cusack's character a puppeteer and really use it. So that was really resourceful, I thought. I think you were talking about, I think it happens when Lottie and Maxine are doing that run through his Malkovich's consciousness. There was a moment that I didn't think was necessary backstory. It was really weird, so I should go back and correct what I said on that front. Because they have this monkey, Elijah, is that right?
Yes.
They go into one of his
Cameron
memories.
Diaz has a pet monkey.
Yeah, it's a memory of his being taken from his mother or something like that. It's this crazy dream that Elijah has because he's in the consciousness loop at some point, and that was a moment that I thought, okay, that was the one moment I couldn't really add into the rest of the film, because, there is this sort of separation situation, and maybe that's like Craig is about to feel that because he's going to be separated because Maxine's daughter, which is really, we think might be, we don't know if it's Lottie's daughter, if it's Craig's daughter, because they both had intercourse with Maxine when they were in John Malkovich's body or mind. It gets very... and that was the only thing I could think of. That was one of those scenes. It's kind of a classic Kaufman thing where, okay, it's really weird, it's kind of funny, but that's the thing that stood out to me that made no sense whatsoever.
I interpreted that as I think that happens when the chimp is going to untie Cameron Diaz when she's tied up in the cage.
Oh, that's right.
So she's been put in a cage.
Yes.
And then the chimp has this kind of because all the way through there's been this running gag that Cameron Diaz is very confident that the chimp has medical problems because of some repressed trauma, and this is presented as just like a silly gag. How can a chimp have repressed trauma? You're too empathic with these animals.
Wow!
And then you get the reveal. Oh no, actually, he does remember the trauma of being caught and seeing his parents being caught in the jungle. So I think that's the angle they're going for on that. Which again is it's like something about sort of empathy and memory and being inside somebody else's head.
Yeah.
But because it's a chimp, actually it's rather more straightforward, and it gives him a bit of motivation to untie her wrists and then move the plot forward.
Brilliant. Good on you. Thank you so much. Well, see, now I love it again. That's a great moment. Yeah, I'll buy that one too.
If I have any criticism of this film,
go ahead.
And I'm very prepared to be told I am wrong. It felt to me like a really organic, spiraling tale. Everything seemed to lead from one step to another very naturally, up until the point, which you must be anticipating from very early on in the film, the point where Malkovich goes inside Malkovich's own head, because. When you talk about the idea, you get to spend 15 minutes inside John Malkovich's head, and then somebody else tries it, and they get a slightly different experience, and someone else tries it, and the idea that occurs to you is, what happens when he does it himself? And so that feels like a natural destination. And then it's only a little while after that that we then swing into the third act. And for me, the third act of this film feels slightly inorganic. It feels to me like the step that it takes from Craig being able to puppeteer his way into John Malkovich's life full time, to there then being a large organised conspiracy of elderly people who plan to occupy John Malkovich's head on midnight on his 44th birthday. I must say, I felt like a sudden, slight jarring shift of story and tone. I wonder whether originally the original story or the original script actually kind of had a different, briefer third act. That maybe I could buy Craig living long term in Malkovich's head, and there being some kind of bittersweet victory over that. But this kind of this sort of extra story element of there being a whole party of elderly people who are going to live inside Malkovich just feels slightly unnatural to me. I'd be interested to read earlier versions of this movie or see what the initial script pitch was like, and to find out whether that idea was early or whether that idea was late, because it strikes me that was probably quite a late idea in the development of the film, and I'm not sure it completely fits in with the rest. Yeah,
and good point. Just the fact that so many people occupying him and Craig being able to get in there as well. And it's explained, I think, that Lester was lonely when he occupied that one body, so he wanted to bring along all his friends. But it's true. I think that's a big ask, and it might have been done, a bit more elegantly. I think as a result, I think the ending is kind of weird because Craig is inside Malkovich with all these other people, but he's using the brain to stalk on Maxine through his own, what might be his own daughter. It's a really strange...
It's some daughter, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's set up a little bit with some of the loves, I think a couple of the love scenes when, both Lottie and Cusack want to make love to Maxine in Malkovich's body. Actually, the first... Craig does it. John Cusack's character does it without Maxine knowing. But it's this really strange bit of cinematic voyeurism when you think about it, because you're inside. You as the viewer are inside with another character inside John Malkovich's body and mind as he's making love to Catherine Keener's character. It's a strange bit of voyeurism, and then it gets a little stranger, I think, when you end up inside the body of his daughter. And if he's is he always going to be there? I couldn't tell if there was a portal to get in there. But they get in there, and what's that going to be like later on in life, where you're occupying your daughter's consciousness through some of those moments we talked about when we talked about Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Oh my God! I'm just realizing why there was never a sequel to this film. Yes,
absolutely. So I think, I think that things often fall apart in the third act, I guess. And I mean, at least here they're falling apart, and they're still entertaining. And
they're still joyfully off kilter.
Yeah, exactly.
But just off kilter at a different angle.
And I think the theme came out early on in the film. I love it when Derek Martini, who's this celebrated puppeteer and sort of an idol or an enemy for Craig's suffering puppeteer, he says consciousness is a curse. And I felt like that was kind of the theme that came out pretty early on. He's watching an interview of Derek Martini, I think, who's this pompous puppeteer, and he says that at one point. I think that sort of comes back to what you're always asking that question, Jimmy. What's it about? What's it about? You've asked me that question a million times.
Oh man, you're right.
So I think that might be it. It's just that when we get what we wish for, sometimes we're very disappointed. And here it's like if you're asking for someone else's consciousness, there's a curse, and most of the characters end up sort of like tainted by the experience of being in there. They're either using John Malkovich and not showing any empathy, as you said earlier, or using his body to. You're the doctor, so you would know this. I don't know how Maxine got impregnated, and if that's John Malkovich's baby or Lottie's baby or.
I think I must have missed that lecture in medical school actually, because I don't think I understand how that works either. I might ask an expert. Yeah, you're right.
So.
Famously, apparently, there was a conversation when the film was originally pitched, which was, why can't it be Being Tom Cruise?
Ooh.
Do you think this film could have worked with any other actor as the John Malkovich character? I mean, could it have been Being Jack Nicholson? Could it have been Being Kevin Costner? I'm trying to think. Who were the biggest stars in 1999?
Yeah. I think they chose well with how about Being Nic Cage?
Actually, you know what? That probably would have
That
worked.
would have saved us the film that we just watched. Yeah. I don't know. I think
with the Spike Jonze Sofia Coppola connection.
Yeah.
I bet he was.
That's right.
I bet he was on the list to call as well.
Good point. Yeah. Oh. I think it worked really well with Malkovich, just because he's a wacky guy too, and he's an interesting person, very somewhat eccentric as a superstar, and I think it works really well with him. Yeah, I can't imagine anyone else now, but Nicolas Cage comes right to mind.
Yep.
Yeah.
He is definitely on number 2 on the podium.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Being John Malkovich, great picture. Still works. Still very entertaining.
Yeah.
I think would still be entertaining even if you didn't know who John Malkovich was. Which it won't be very long before there will be an audience who won't really particularly remember who John Malkovich was.
Yeah.
But yet the film will still have, I think, basically the same impact on them that it did on us in 1999.
Yeah. And again, that piece of exposition in the middle helps you with that, because even if people don't know him, there's actually sort of a true to life bit of exposition in the form of that documentary for people. So it does have an interesting shelf life as a result.
Yep. It preserves itself, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Great. I think these two films really, they work together really well. I only remembered a few minutes ago that John Malkovich and Nic Cage played together opposite each other in Con Air, didn't they?
Yes.
So this podcast is kind of like Con Air 2. That's the way I'm thinking of it. That's what we should call it. Okay, great. Well, this has been the Two Real Cinema Club. This has been good fun as always. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and I hope you will join us for the next one. Thanks and goodbye.
Thanks, Jimmy. Goodbye, everybody.